halfway point of the SportsCenter, standing by for that weekend kickoff show. Then NC State against Wake. We check our major stories, topped by the end of Marv Albert's sexual assault trial in Arlington, Virginia. The sportscaster today pleaded guilty to the misdemeanor of assaulting a woman with whom he'd had a 10-year sexual relationship, while the felony charge of forcible sodomy, which carried a possible life sentence, that charge was dropped. Within hours of his plea, Albert was fired by NBC Sports. He later resigned from the MSG network. The plea came after a morning of negotiations between prosecutors and defense. Albert will be sentenced October 24th. Today, he admitted he had assaulted his accuser 7 months ago.
From my point of view, I just felt that I had to end this ordeal for myself, my wonderful family, my fiance, Heather, my friends, the supporters.
Albert's plea comes one day after a prosecution bombshell testimony from another woman that Albert on 2 occasions had been sexually aggressive and had once attempted to bite her and have her perform oral sex. The prosecution called that testimony profound to Albert's decision today. Albert's attorney maintains the guilty plea came when testimony damaging to the accuser was not allowed into evidence.
Under the rules in Virginia, much of our evidence was not allowed. I think if all our evidence had been allowed, we would not be in this position right now.
We feel it is appropriate that Mr. Albert pleaded guilty to this charge, to this crime against this victim.
Albert could be sentenced up to 1 year in prison and fined $2,500. One local legal expert tonight discussed the probable disposition of the case in 30 days.
But after the yesterday's surprise witness, that second bombshell, and the threat of other bombshells coming out day after day after day, having to look that jury straight in the eye and say, I was engaged in these activities repeatedly, and I thought I did not coerce her. Basically, I'm a little deviant, but I'm basically a nice guy. That defense may evaporate. And he, rather than take that chance, he thought he'd take the plea.
Albert's accuser agreed to the plea agreement today. It was obvious from the first moments at the courthouse this morning that something was in the works. Within 4 hours, the plea deal was struck. Sal Paolantonio was at the courtroom all week covering this trial. Sal, there is a torturous history to this plea bargain. Bring us up to date on it.
Bob, sources close to this case tell ESPN that Marv Albert was offered this plea agreement on 3 different occasions. 2 weeks ago, before the trial began, prosecutor Richard Troughton went to Roy Black, the defense attorney, and Marv Albert and said, listen, if you agree to plead guilty to the lesser charge of assault and battery, we will drop the sexual sodomy charge. At that time, Roy Black and Marv Albert were in agreement saying, no, we want to go ahead with the trial. Then this morning, after yesterday's testimony, the bombshell testimony that you talked about earlier, in which a woman from Hyatt Hotel said that Marv Albert made 2 sexual advances to her and bit her in 1993 and 1994, again, prosecutor Richard Troughton went to Black and Albert and said, do you want to go along with this plea agreement? At that point, sources tell ESPN that Roy Black did not want to go along with it and that Marv Albert and his family were willing to discuss a plea agreement. There was a bit of a disagreement. That's when, if you remember earlier when we talked at noon today, I said that when the judge came back into chambers at 11:50 this morning, he was wondering what was going on in the trial. The prosecutor said, I have one more witness. The judge just angrily got up, went into a sidebar, turned on the white noise so we couldn't hear what was going on, but you could see that he was sternly lecturing Black, pointing his finger at him very agitatedly. Then he went back to the bench and abruptly adjourned for lunch for an hour. When they came back, everybody was in agreement. There was a plea bargain.
So Albert takes the plea agreement. He will be sentenced by the judge and not the jury. Had this gone to a verdict, had they played out through the trial, it would have been the jury. So I imagine it's a very different scenario from the defense side looking at the judge passing sentence.
At Virginia law, the jury passes sentence, and it's an overlooked part of this plea agreement that Marv Albert definitely did not want to have his fate in the hands of 12 jurors, rather the judge who might be a little bit more understanding of what Marv Albert has gone through and maybe give him, perhaps, as we heard from legal experts earlier, probation and not jail time.
And in litigious America, a civil suit is a foregone conclusion here, do you think?
There's no doubt about it. We've heard from the beginning that the woman accused Marv Albert of this would definitely sue him, and it looks as though he's already pled guilty to such a civil suit since he's pled guilty to this assault charge.
Okay, Sal Paolantonio at the courthouse in Arlington. Thanks, Sal. NBC fired Marv Albert essentially because management felt he had not told them the truth about the incident in that hotel room back in February. Albert also resigned tonight from the MSG network. For 30 years, Albert has been the voice of the New York Knicks. Even before NBC fired Albert, over 12,000 people had responded to a question on ESPN SportsCenter. Now, yes, this is an unscientific poll, but ESPN SportsCenter asked if Marv Albert should be allowed to broadcast sporting events. As of the moment that NBC fired Albert, over 12,000 people had voted. 52% said yes, 48% said no. Again, this poll is unscientific, but it shows a great divide at that point in the sporting public, at least on the Sports Zone.